My name's Zoe Alexander. I'm Director of Strategy at Nest. I can't take any credit for today. Quite a lot of people have said thanks for today, and I've had to kind of say, no, I haven't been involved at all, but I am getting roped into doing this, so I guess I can take a tiny bit of credit for that. So the session today is picking up really on two themes that we talked about this morning, and I think are really, really critical to the next phase of thinking about pension saving in the context of auto-enrolment. So one is around coverage. So if you look at where we've got to with automatic enrolment and you look at some of the discussions that happened around the automatic enrolment review, there are still some groups that aren't covered sufficiently, and women is one of the significant groups where there's quite a shortfall in terms of some groups saving for retirement. Self-employment is another one, and some of you will have gone and had a look at the study that Maddie's been talking about over the break. So coverage is one issue. And then the other issue, which is even more complex in some ways, is the kind of nuance and the complexity of individuals' lives, and to what extent do we want to try and tailor automatic enrolment in a way that makes it work for those groups which might otherwise get left out. And it is by its nature a blunt instrument, automatic enrolment, and it's a really good blunt instrument, and I think we all think that it's net a great thing, but it's thinking about whether through alterations to the policy, or whether through things that the industry does, or things that employers do, or individuals, how can we build on that blunt instrument to build a system that kind of picks everyone up, and how can we get people saving at a level that works for them and for their own individual, often quite complex circumstances. So we've got three great speakers here today, and we're going to be talking about women's experience of pension saving. We're going to be talking about mental health and how that can affect the way that people relate to their money and their propensity and ability to save. And we're going to be talking about young people as well. So I hope it's something that people are going to find really stimulating. The way that we're going to do it is that each of our presenters is going to talk for around about 10-15 minutes in turn, and then we should have about 45 minutes or so left for a good long session at the end for questions and discussion. So I'm going to ask Iona to stand up first to present.
Great, thank you, Zoe. So I'm Iona Bain. I'm founder of the Young Money blog and agency. I'm absolutely delighted to be here in front of you all to talk about young savers. And when I'm asked to do things like this, I don't know whether it's a pang of imposter syndrome kicking in, but I always wonder, why me? Why am I being asked to offer my thoughts? Surely what I'm going to say will be obvious to lots of people in the room, either because they are young people or it is their job to think about young savers. And surely I'm too young and inexperienced to know that much about pensions myself, and speaking to you, maybe there's going to be quite a big knowledge gap. However, I have to remind myself that actually Nest is a very young organisation, and auto-enrolment is a very new experiment, one of the most ambitious pensions experiments in the world, and we're still in the very early stages of that experiment. So maybe now is the time to welcome new thoughts, new perspectives, and new ideas. So that's where I come in. And I do think that it is a puzzle, and I will try to offer my thoughts on how we can start to solve that puzzle, but hopefully I won't be providing any pat solutions or be too vague in what I say. I just want to give you a bit of background about who I am in case you haven't come across me before. I started the Young Money blog in 2011, 8 years ago. I was 23. I had graduated a few years previously, and actually at that point in my life, I should have felt like the whole world was in front of me. I came from a comfortable, lower middle class family. I grew up in a perfectly nice house in Edinburgh, went to a perfectly nice school. I then managed to go to Oxford. And after that, I thought to myself, what am I going to do with my life, and how am I going to become financially secure and independent? I never wanted to make lots of money, but I think like most young people, I wanted to have a fulfilling job, and I wanted to earn enough to be comfortable and happy. And it became very apparent to me that actually, age 23, just a few years after the financial crash, this was one of the worst environments for graduates in recent memory. In fact, the Resolution Foundation recently found that this was a crisis cohort, this group of people, including me, who were graduating just after the financial crash. Their salaries have never really recovered. Their wages have fallen behind every other group, including groups that have followed. So actually, there is a very particular problem with millennials like me now, who are in their late 20s, early 30s, who were really held back during that time. And to be honest, having a salary would have been a nice problem to have at that time, even if it was somewhat low and not really progressing, because actually I was struggling to find work, I was struggling to live on my own, to afford housing costs, so I had to move back home with my mum and dad. And that's why I started the Young Money blog, because at that time, I needed help with my finances. I needed to try and make sense of this financial maze that I saw in front of me, and I didn't know how to, because all the personal finance media that I saw was talking about young people, but it wasn't coming from the young perspective. It was all happening above our heads. You had a lot of concerned parents writing columns about the housing crisis or the student loan situation. But I thought, what's missing from this conversation is our perspective. So I started the blog so I could learn more about money, and it's been a fascinating process. 8 years on, I now get to speak at events like this and also listen to what the industry has to say about young people's problems. And I get a very strong impression now that the financial industry is taking notice. It used to be the case that I would go to companies and I would go to editors and I would say, young personal finance is a neglected subject, but oh boy, interest is going to take off very, very soon, and you want to be at the front of that trend. And that message used to fall on deaf ears. Not anymore. And I think it's because, partly, we've had auto-enrollment, and it means that for the first time, we have most young people in this country saving into a product. We'll come on to the fact that maybe not all of them, if in fact most of them aren't even aware of this fact, but they are nonetheless saving for their retirement. Therefore, I sort of feel that there's a responsibility and an obligation now for the financial industry to understand what young people are experiencing today and how they can try and make their lives better, because I'm sure most people in this industry, maybe you didn't set out to work in this industry. I haven't met that many people who've said when they were 4 years old they wanted to work in pensions. But nonetheless, you find yourself here, I think, because you actually want to help people. And you want to help them in the long term. I actually think that now means helping them in the short term as well. So there can be no doubt that there is a pensions youthquake underway. And I think the pensions youthquake is a bit more solid than the political youthquake that's been spoken about many times. And auto-enrollment is here to stay. These ONS statistics show the sheer reach of auto-enrollment. It's not going away, and I think most of us would accept and acknowledge that auto-enrollment should stay because, as Zoe said, it's a blunt instrument, but it's one that works in getting people to start saving for their retirement, to take the decision-making out of what could otherwise be a difficult choice, to think about this very far-off stage in life that most people just don't consider in their daily lives. However, we all know that there are potential gulfs and divides that could open up within the auto-enrollment system. Maybe not by design, maybe by accident, just by default, because it is a blunt instrument. And as time goes on, we have the opportunity to try and refine that blunt instrument so it works for more and more people. So we know about the obvious dividing line between those older workers who are more likely to have a DB pension compared to younger workers who are more likely to have a DC pension. But I feel we have to highlight other dividing lines as well that will generate more and more attention, surely, as time goes on. Again, private and public is an obvious dividing line, but also consider the differing contribution rates between small and micro employees and those who work for large organizations. Now, that's going to potentially create a big gulf and a sense of resentment as well among the population if they feel that just by dint of working for a small employer, then they're being deprived of the opportunity to have more in their pension. Then there's the unenrolled, so Generation Z. There are no hard and fast rules for what a millennial is and what a Gen Zer is, but broadly speaking, I think a lot of Gen Z are not currently enrolled because of the minimum age, and that will change in years to come. But right now, that is a concern, that there is a significant portion of people starting work today who are not enrolled and know nothing about pensions. And of course, the self-employed. I'm self-employed, and I am concerned about how we map auto-enrollment, which works pretty well within the employer context, onto self-employment. How do we do that? Because actually self-employed people have very unpredictable, fluid working patterns, and they want flexibility, and I'll come on to that later on. And then we've also got a rather worrying divide between those who are in professional sectors, so what you might have called at one time white-collar workers, and those who are in, as the ONS described it, elemental jobs, more blue-collar professions. And we all know about this unfair discrepancy with net pay schemes that has to be resolved urgently. And I think one of the biggest dividing lines for younger people is between renters and those who can get help from the bank of mum and dad, who can get onto the housing ladder sooner, who hopefully have made a good decision, who hopefully haven't just rushed into, let's say, a help to buy scheme where they are overpaying for a house and getting themselves into lots of debt, but that's a debate and discussion for another day. Hopefully they will have bought a home in an area where house prices are likely to rise, where it's a fairly solid investment, and most importantly, they have the opportunity to pay down their housing costs in the long term. And this is an aspect of the pensions debate that slightly frustrates me. We have a dichotomy between housing and pensions, understandably, because it's often presented as an either-or choice in political and financial circles. And that's unhelpful to young people because they are all part of a bigger picture. Obviously, if you can pay down your housing costs over time, then you're going to have more money to put into your pension. So there can be some good reasons to encourage flexibility, or at least a flexible mindset when it comes to housing. And then I think that the biggest debate that we've had since auto-enrollment was launched is how do we move the auto-enrollment generation from being apathetic and largely unaware that auto-enrollment's even happening to a position where they are aware that it's happening, and that if they need to make decisions that will get them a better retirement fund, then they can do so. Well, it's a really complex debate, and I'm sure you've all kicked over the issues involved today. So I don't want to present a really simplistic position on it. And I remain open to a lot of the paternalistic arguments for keeping people in funds where they don't have to make those complex investment decisions, where we're not intruding on people's lives and asking them to weigh up difficult aspects of their investment portfolio any given time. And I think recently with the Neil Woodford situation, we have seen actually almost a mass misunderstanding of what investments are. It's been quite a worrying reminder, I think, for the financial industry that most people of all ages, including young people, I saw lots of young people had invested in Woodford. Some people had invested all their money in a Woodford fund. That clearly there's so much more that needs to be done to educate the general public, regardless of age, about what investing means. But I feel that the risks of not engaging are greater than the risks of engaging. So whilst, yes, there is always that risk that somebody could make a bad decision, be excessively risky, or just misjudge their time horizons, we still have to consider the fact that, unfortunately, we do not have adequate funds at the moment that will ensure that young people reach retirement and have the pension that they deserve, that they've worked hard for. And there are three factors for this. You've obviously got the issue of contribution rates that we all know about. But the second one that doesn't get that much emphasis in the media, and I'm sure will come under more scrutiny is the risk of default duds. And I hate to bring up this report because it is quite critical of the UK in the world context of default investment strategies, but it has to be raised. This is an issue that isn't going to go away. And unfortunately, maybe this is the consumer blogger and journalist in me that's speaking, but I am not in favor of a system that's completely self-policed, whereby the industry basically says to young people, no, don't worry, we're going to go away, we're going to fix this, we're going to sort this out, we'll make sure it's fine. I believe that a more open, transparent, and progressive system would say, we accept that auto-enrollment isn't perfect, and we accept that at the moment default funds maybe aren't producing the returns, aren't going to produce the returns that you'll need. And we want to try and give you a better choice. We want to try and make you more aware of what investing is, because that's what really you're doing in the long term with a pension fund. And we want to give you a choice. And we're not just going to give you that choice for the sake of it. We're doing it to try and drive progress and change within the industry. So that's my view on defaults. So what are the potential pieces of the pensions puzzle for me? Well, I think it's about everything in moderation, really. Whilst on the one hand, more engagement is probably going to be needed, on the other hand, we know what the risks of over-engaging and overwhelming young workers are. So I suppose if we'll break that down, what it means is, first of all, information, but not too much information. So I'm really in favor of the work that the ABI has been doing in simplifying the language that we use when communicating with all savers. And that needs to be as radical as possible. You need radical simplicity, I think, after decades of mystifying, baffling language that puts off people. Do I think that that means that you need to be communicating more? Well, no, not necessarily. I don't think that we should just scrap annual statements even sent in the post. I know some people might feel like they are still fairly antiquated, but I still think that there is a place for communications that sit outside this overwhelming digital landscape. I'm sure you're all quite sick of all the nudges and notifications and emails that you get from various people and providers in your life about things you care about. So things that you're maybe not so enthusiastic and passionate about, like your pension, the last thing you want is to be bombarded with information. But nonetheless, I think there is a space for a dual approach where when we are communicating really important things, the welcome pack, the annual statement, and so on, and potentially nudging people into raising their contributions when they get a pay rise, those kind of important communications, I think there's still a place for them via old-fashioned post, but at the same time, maybe we can deploy notifications, nudges, emails, app-based education over a longer period of time to keep people in tune with their pension. And obviously, the pensions dashboard will be, hopefully, a big step forward in that arena. Education, but not too soon. I think we have slightly laboured under the misapprehension that more financial education is a good thing. If we have more financial education in schools, young people will leave school feeling confident, empowered, and knowledgeable about their finances. If only that was true. But unfortunately, the evidence from the Money Advice Service, formerly the Money Advice Service's What Works Fund on financial education, suggests that it's actually only very specific targeted interventions at the end of school about specific issues like pensions that really work. So yes, by all means, we can talk to primary school children about the value of money and get them thinking about money issues in a very general way, because you do form your attitudes to money by the age of 8, which is quite frightening. But when it comes to something like pensions, there is no point talking to very young children about a pension, in my opinion. But what does make sense is to talk to school leavers if they're about to start in the world of work, especially when the auto-enrollment age goes down, or even before that, because it prepares the ground so that when they get to the minimum age, they are inclined to stay in. But obviously, people who leave university now are calling out for that balanced information about what they need to do with their finances. And I feel that the pensions industry could come together much more effectively to talk to universities, talk to graduate employers, talk to apprenticeship providers, and see whether or not we can create a much bigger conversation about what workplace pensions are and how they fit in with a typical graduate or apprentice's financial decisions post-education. Flexibility up to a point. This is another controversial debate, but one that I am prepared to go into for the sake of opening up the discussion, really, about housing and how that interacts with pensions. I don't know if anybody read Pete Glancy's piece in the Telegraph recently. Pete Glancy from Scottish Widows was saying the unsayable in pensions, really, that we need to entertain the idea of more flexible products. Because coming back to the point that I made earlier on, if somebody is saving for their first property and they are able to accomplish that sooner, they may well then be able to put more into their pension in the long term. Now, this isn't easy to do, and obviously we don't want to have unlimited flexibility and unlimited access. That would completely undermine the point of pensions. But we do need to think about controlled flexibility and controlled access. And that's why I am very excited about the sidecar savings scheme, because it is taking a real problem that lower income workers especially have, and lots of younger workers, whatever their income or background. It is taking a problem that's rife in the UK, and it is using the pension system to try and address that. And by doing that as well, it is almost insulating itself, I think, from the risk of opt-outs when contribution rates do go up, because we are addressing those basic financial problems. And likewise, I think we need to have a conversation about lifetime ISAs. So for lots and lots of young workers under the age of 40, they make a fantastic supplementary product. They are not perfect. They have lots of flaws that need to be ironed out. And unfortunately, they are a political product, so there's always that sword of Damocles hanging over them. However, what I do believe is that ISAs are more readily understood by young people than pensions. There's something about tax relief that most young people I speak to find to be total gibberish, and they can't understand it. It's like a foreign language. But ISAs has a relatively simple, straightforward structure that most young people, even if they're not that financially confident, they can grasp that. And that's something potentially that we can work with. And then choice, but obviously not for its own sake. So you would probably expect me to say, one of the biggest choices that young people need today is to be able to invest in ESG funds. Now, I think that this is perhaps an example of us talking in a bubble, because actually, I think it's only a minority of young people who would genuinely be motivated in ESG for the sake of it. Now, whether or not we need to consider ESG investment policies because they make investment sense, that's a different discussion. That's a debate that we need to be having, and potentially we need to be involving young people in that debate, inviting them into that debate. But just woke-washing pension schemes, I don't think that will work. I don't think that's the kind of choice that we should be limited to. What we should be doing is looking at the defaults that we have at the moment. We should be then maybe offering a limited menu, one that's not excessive, that's just going to overwhelm and bombard young savers, but one that at least can address their appetite for risk. And if they do want to be more explicitly ESG focused in their investing, then so be it. So those are the four pieces of the pensions puzzle for me, but I'm very happy to have a debate and discuss what I've said. Thank you very much.
Going to move straight on to Yvonne.
Yeah, I'll just carry on.
Iona.
Great presentation. Okay, so I wanted to talk to you about the gender pensions gap. Now, the gender pay gap has had heaps of attention over the last few years, and so there's metrics and all of that, so we know what it looks like. We know what it looks like in the financial service industry. It doesn't look particularly great. But it's only really quite recently that there's been a little bit of attention around the gender pensions gap. And there are various different estimates. This one from the very reliable Pensions Policy Institute is probably the best. And what it shows you, no need to focus on the exact numbers, is that basically when you get to 65, men have double the pension pot that women have, just over double actually. And last year the trade union Prospect came out with a figure for the overall gap, and they put it at just under 40%, double the gender pay gap. And those are obviously pretty huge and pretty concerning numbers. Now we also know that automatic enrollment has actually sorted something out, which is equal participation pretty much between men and women in pensions, and that's obviously an enormous amount of progress. But again, for me, the real killer stat, and again, thanks to the Pensions Policy Institute, and I can see that Tim is here, was in that report, or rather briefing note that came out a month ago, which said that actually, if things stay as they are, it will narrow by 2060, so in the next 40 years, by exactly 3%. And I think that is actually a pretty unacceptable outcome for us societally. And that is where the Ensuring Women's Future initiative comes in, which you may have heard about. It has had a little bit of press coverage at various different points. And that's a cross-industry project which is coordinated by the Chartered Insurance Institute. And there's been already some really quite good reports put together by Jane Portas from PwC. And they look at the overall financial risks that women face as a result of their life course. She terms them perils and pitfalls. And if you look at them in the aggregate, they actually paint a pretty worrying picture. Now, if we start with the gender pay gap, we know about that already. And of course, bizarrely, girls are actually doing very well at school, but they end up typically in lower paid apprenticeships and in lower paid professions. If they then have children, the majority of them return to work part-time, 61% return to work part-time. And that, of course, is partly a function of how expensive childcare is, but also partly a function of societal expectations. 43% of people think mothers should work part-time. If they then do work part-time, they earn 30% less per hour than women who work full-time. And we also know that women who work part-time often stagnate in their careers, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. If they then cohabit, which is quite common, 3.3 million couples cohabit in the UK. They don't have, it's a bit different in Scotland, but they don't have any financial protection if the relationship breaks down. And if they get divorced, 71% of couples don't discuss pension sharing, with a result that very often men who are the more financially powerful person in the relationship anyway walk away with their entire pension. Wife keeps the house with heaps of mortgage debt on it and a little bit of equity. So overall, the financial outlook for women is actually pretty grim. And these factors will affect women who also start out today. So I think you were already talking about that in a very compelling fashion, Iona. This is not going to change. This is the way it is. This is the way it is for people who are in their 50s, 60s. This is the way it will be for women who are now in their 20s and just starting out. Okay, so fair enough. What can pensions policy do? Now, the IWF project has a number of different work streams. I chair the one on pension game changers, and Zoe is one of the members of it, and various people from various organizations who are here have also helped with that. We've been looking at, well, what could pensions policy do to change this? What are the levers that we have? And, you know, there's a few gaps. So I should actually also have said there's also a huge piece around financial confidence, but you know that, you know, women traditionally have a lot lower financial confidence than men. Okay, in terms of gaps in pensions policy, so if you look at automatic enrollment, 63% of female workers meet the eligibility criteria. So if they're eligible, they're doing fine compared to women, but a lot of them are not, because a lot of female workers are less likely to meet the earnings criteria. And whilst the government conducted a review in 2017, and it looked at the age threshold and committed to bring that down, and it looked at the thresholds and committed to start pension contributions from £1, it did not actually look at the earnings threshold. If you put that down and equalized it with national insurance, you'd capture another 480,000 people. And we know that people in that category will be disproportionately female, and a lot of them also lose out because they have more than one job, and that's just not how automatic enrollment is configured at the moment. As you said, Zoe, it's a blunt instrument, so we would have to look exactly at affordability and everything else, but that is something that we could look at, and government should look at, with a bit more focus. We also need to fix that absolutely ridiculous injustice of basically if you're in the wrong pension scheme, you're not going to get any tax relief if you don't pay any income tax. Again, 111 million pounds get lost to people every year, lost to women particularly every year, and looking at that and looking at the thresholds would definitely help. And you've already mentioned it, Iona, I think the dashboard will help, because my guess is, given what we know about financial engagement, a lot of the people who have lost connection with their pension, and we know there's 20 billion pounds missing, it's not missing, but lost to people, a lot of them, my guess is, will be women again. But I think we also need a much sharper institutional focus on gender. And for me, the Money and Pension Service has actually quite a big role to play here. It's just been set up. Their mission, by law, is to ensure that information, guidance, and advice is available to those most in need, particularly those in vulnerable circumstances. And I think it's pretty unarguable, if you put all of the evidence together, that actually the risks that go along with a female life course make a lot of women actually pretty vulnerable and certainly most in need. And so the group came to the conclusion that improving women's financial well-being should be one of the top strategic priorities for the Money and Pension Service. And that, of course, would not just benefit women. I mean, let's face it, 50% of the population, that's quite a lot. But it would also benefit those who they care for, their children, particularly. We must also do something about the lack of gender disaggregated data. I don't know whether any of you have read Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, came out a bit earlier this year. And that's quite a sobering read, actually. What she talks about is the lack of data about women, generally, not just in pensions policy, but generally, and how the infrastructure in which we live, from office temperatures to how we were talking about this earlier, how mics are configured, has been built on data collated by men who wear suits and who quite like it a bit cooler. And those are very, very harmless examples, but there are others which are much more significant, and they have a very detrimental, sometimes devastating consequences for women. So to bring this back to pensions, we don't know, for example, how the pension freedoms are affecting women. We don't know what choices they're making, what products they're buying, how families make decisions. And that data is very rarely collected. Nest is, of course, a very, very notable exemption. So is Scottish Widows. So still, we have a really, really worrying absence of data split by gender. And we would like the DWP, the FCA, the TPR, MAPS, to collect gender-specific pensions data to help formulate policy. But it's pretty clear also that pension policy levers will only take you that far. Britain is in the bottom third of OECD countries when it comes to support for parents. Shared parental leave is a wonderful policy, but only 1% of eligible parents actually take it up because it's just not financially viable. In the UK, childcare costs consume 1/3 of an average household's income. And if men then only have £149 a week, which is their statutory entitlement, during their parental leave, where women get 90% of their earnings during 6 weeks, we have created a situation where women do the lion's share of the caring, the childcare, from the word go, and then it stays like that. Equalizing that would go some way to eliminate the structural reasons for the gender pay gap and for the gender pensions gap as well. Beyond caring for children, there's also the much, much wider issue of care for disabled children, aging parents, frail friends. And again, that can have a huge impact on carers' physical and mental health, and can also have a very profound impact on their financial security and retirement. The overall economic contribution of that to the UK economy is £77 billion a year, as calculated by Carers UK. So in our view, again, carers need a lot more financial recognition to secure their retirement. And of course, again, this goes way beyond pension policy levers. Now, addressing all of this might have felt like a bit of a moonshot in the current climate, but I don't know whether you saw it yesterday. The Women and Equalities Minister and Secretary of State for Defence, Penny Mordaunt, published a document entitled Gender Equality at Every Stage, a roadmap for change. And that includes promises of action for various things: gender stereotypes, improving the gender balance of education outcomes, particularly girls' uptake of STEM subjects, improving availability of flexible working, employment rights for carers, and various other things. And I think that is a really, really welcome signal that this issue is finally getting the sort of attention it really deserves at government level. But I think it's also quite important to look at our own sector, how we're actually doing as a sector in terms of gender equality. Now, the ABI has a diversity and inclusion program. I'm the executive sponsor for that. And as part of this, we've started to collect data about the distribution of women at different levels of seniority in the insurance and long-term savings industry. And it's actually getting a bit better. Now, obviously, still low, as you can see, at entry level, it's about even when you get down to executive team, 22%. But from 2017 to 2018, the percentage actually rose, and it rose in the executive team at board level and in the management teams. And that is a good direction to see, even if we still have quite a way to go. It's also becoming much more normal for companies in our sector to have a diversity and inclusion strategy with an executive sponsor, to have mentoring and development programs to support underrepresented groups. Lastly, we also specifically looked at the gender seniority gap. So this bit that you can see here, women make up a quarter, not even a quarter, well, now a bit more than a quarter of the executive population. And basically what we found was motherhood really is the key reason. And if you think back to the very first slide, the PPI stats show that it's all pretty much equal, pension savings pretty much equal, and then it sort of drifts off, and then men's go like this, and women's go like that, and at the end they end up with a sort of difference of about a half. And from that piece of research about basically people just fall, right? Their seniority just goes down really very significantly if they have children. What we have to take away from there, though, in terms of what we actually do about it, there's quite a bit around flexible working practices, more job shares, and also developing ways for people to advance who work part-time. So perhaps to conclude from all of this, I think we still have a mountain to climb as a society in delivering gender equality. But if we actually collectively keep a focus on this, and if we get a bit more imaginative, then I think we will see change, and we're seeing change already. And I hope that yesterday's announcement will be carried through whatever the political melee that we're going to see over the next few months and years. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Yvonne.
Thank you. Great. So I'm Helen. I'm the Chief Executive of the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute. I am not going to talk to you very much about pensions. I'm going to talk to you quite a lot about people. So I want to talk about some of the people who are behind your pensions products, some of the people who are hoping one day to have some pension savings, and an aspect of people's lives that we don't often focus on very much in these kinds of conversations. So the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute is a research charity. We were set up by Martin Lewis, who you might know from Money Saving Expert, and our aim is to better understand and tackle the link between financial difficulty and mental health problems. You can see up there our goal is a world where this vicious cycle is broken. So we all have an equal chance of financial security, and that means throughout our lives, regardless of our mental health, and everyone's mental health can flourish regardless of their financial circumstances. Because unfortunately, that's not the world we're living in at the moment. So we know that people who are experiencing mental health problems are 3.5 times as likely to be in problem debt. Half of adults in problem debt have a mental health problem. And that's about 1.5 million people in England alone who are currently experiencing both of those issues. I've used the England figure because that's the only one that's really reliably collected, but of course it's going to be a similar picture right across the UK. It's really important that these conversations about long-term savings include a focus on mental health problems for a number of reasons. Firstly, because we know that mental health problems affect our ability to save. So the likelihood of you being in that group who have a pension pot that you can rely on is reduced if you have a mental health problem. And secondly, because we know that mental health problems affect our ability to engage with financial products. They affect the financial decisions that we make, the ways in which we think and communicate and use those products. So when we're designing financial products, we need to understand the different needs that people might have. And also because this is not a niche issue. So it's fairly easy to think, oh, presentation about mental health, maybe there's a small group of people that I need to identify and offer them something different. But actually, it's 1/4 of us in the room right now. So 1/4 of people right now in this room will be living with a mental health problem that is likely to be affecting financial decisions to a greater or lesser extent. For some people, that's relatively small. For other people, it's quite big, and it can really vary day to day. But across our lifetime, that is half of us. And pensions products are lifetime products. If you have somebody who is saving towards their pension from a very young age, half of those people will experience a mental health problem at some point in their life that will affect their ability to save into that product, or will affect their ability to understand it, their ability to make decisions, their ability to communicate with their pensions provider. So that's why I was really delighted to be asked to come and speak, because I think it's such an important part of the puzzle and one that we don't very often focus on. So this is one of the reasons why it matters. So as people with an interest in pensions, we can kind of take it as given that you think it's important that people have financial security. That is really important. But it's also important because of the impact that has on our mental health and on the rest of our lives. So at Money and Mental Health, research is the heart of everything we do. We run a research community with a group of 5,000 people who all have personal experience of mental health problems. Their experiences are at the heart of all of our research. We survey them, they take part in polls and focus groups every single week. This diagram is a very simple summary of a very complex set of situations that we have analysed as part of that research. So this is the relationship between financial difficulty and mental health. I'm not going to focus on this for too long. Most of it is relatively intuitive. That big blue arrow that runs from financial difficulties to mental health is the direct impact of being in financial difficulty. So for anyone who's ever been behind on bills, you will know that receiving those letters makes you feel guilty. It makes people feel anxious. It affects our mental health fairly directly. But there are also a range of other impacts. For example, the demand on your time and energy of struggling with your finances, of having too many things to weigh up. Every decision about what you're going to buy, which bill to pay first, takes longer. There's the impact of creditors getting in touch with you, and the impact, for example, of going without essentials. So that's people going without energy, people going without food, or going without adequate clothing in order to make ends meet. These are all potential impacts of not getting this right, because these affect people right across their life course. And at the most kind of scary end, over 100,000 people in problem debt attempt to take their own lives every year in England. And again, this is England because that's where the figures are collected. You'd expect a relatively similar picture across the UK. In fact, it's likely to be slightly worse in Northern Ireland, where the suicide figures are looking even more concerning. And nearly 1/4 of people who attempted suicide last year were in problem debt.
Wow.
And this affects people right across their life course. So if we're thinking about older people, we're thinking about people who unexpectedly do not have enough money to live on in their retirement. We're looking at people who may be very financially vulnerable. And this is why it matters to get it right. So you're 3 times as likely to have thought about suicide in the last year if you are in financial difficulty. So this diagram is the relationship in the other direction. And I'm going to spend a little longer focusing over the next few slides on some of these things, because these are the things that, as pension providers or people with an interest in pensions, are more in our control. So this is how mental health problems affect our finances. So there is a range of immediate things that can happen when we're living with mental health problems, including associated physical health problems, relationship difficulties. Yvonne's already talked about the impact of divorce or separation for cohabiting couples on our finances. People can end up paying for mental health treatments that can be very expensive. But all of this range of things that are happening over there on the right lead to these 3 things in the middle, which is where I'm going to really focus. So that's our income going down, our spending going up, and our ability to manage our money, and particularly to manage the disconnect between those 2 things, is reduced. So it's no wonder you're 3.5 times as likely to end up in a complete financial mess if your money going in has gone down, your money going out has gone up, and you're not able to manage that. And on the right here, we've got, or sorry, on the left as you're looking at it, some of the impacts that people are experiencing that are fairly straightforward. So focusing first on loss of or low income, and I'm going to drill into this one a bit more than some of the others, because this is part of the puzzle where I think there is most potential for pensions products to have some interesting solutions, but also where it's really important to understand what's actually happening in people's lives. So people with mental health problems are less likely to be employed. They are more likely to have extended periods of sickness absence where they may not be getting any pension contributions. They're more likely to be living on a low income, so less able to save towards their pensions. And they're more likely to be in precarious work. So picking up some of these things in turn. So unemployment. The unemployment rate for people with mental health problems is pretty shocking. Only 43% of people with mental health problems are in employment, compared to 74% across the population. There are 2.3 million people in the UK who are currently living with a mental health problem that is affecting the amount of paid work that they can do. So that's both people who are out of employment, but also people who are working part-time, who'd like to be working full-time, people who are self-employed, who are struggling to work as much as they'd like to. And 300,000 people with a long-term mental health condition lose their job every single year. So this is often people who would like to be working, who have a history of working, but who find that their illness means that they're unable to sustain that job. And particularly, actually, the point that was raised about the lower earnings limit earlier, I think, is really important. So we get on to thinking about what's happening to people's finances in that time as well. So looking at workplace sickness absence, you can see here, so this is from a survey that we did of our research community. It's entirely of people with personal experience of mental health problems. It's about 450 people that we spoke to here. People with mental health problems are much more likely to be off work for a longer period of time. So 59% had taken 3 months or more, and a quarter had taken over a year. And those are lengths of sickness absence where people are likely to stop receiving any kind of sick pay. If they were receiving sick pay from their employer, they're likely to be moving into the benefits system. They probably have stopped receiving pension contributions a little while ago. But we're also concerned about the frequency of those periods of sickness absence. So 24% of people in our survey who have mental health problems had taken time off because of their mental health 8 or more times over the last 5 years. So if you think about what's happening to people's finances over that period of time, during those periods, people are taking a severe income shock quite often, and that's affecting their long-term savings. And this is a pattern that's repeated throughout people's lives. And looking at what's happening financially to people in those circumstances, you can see we asked people what they did. So what they did when their income went down as a result of workplace sickness absence. And this is of people who took more than 4 weeks off work as a result of a mental health problem. Crucially, over half of people on here have what we would classify as severe detriment. So that means that they are behind on their bills, they've missed rent or mortgage payments, or they've gone without energy, food, or other life essentials. Half of these people who are taking periods of workplace sickness absence. And I think this comes back to Iona's point about sidecar savings. Some of these people have savings in a pension. Some of them have savings for much later in their life that they can't access, but they don't have enough money right now to keep the heating on. And I think that poses a real challenge for everybody. If we know this group of people are less likely to have savings in later life that they can rely on, but are also suffering really severe detriment in the short term as a result of a lack of available cash. So I've covered people being less likely to be employed, more likely to have extended periods of sickness absence. People are more likely to be on low incomes for longer periods of time if they're living with mental health problems. That's due to a complicated range of factors, difficulties with workplace progression, as well as people being more likely to be in part-time work. And coming back to the income threshold, that's likely to pose an issue there. And we also know that people are more likely to be in precarious work if they're living with mental health conditions. Now, I would love to see some more research about the pension prospects of people with mental health problems in more detail, but I would suspect that that means that people are more likely to be collecting multiple small pensions, which are harder to manage as people are moving between jobs, which makes their pension situation much more complicated to manage, which is something that we already know is likely to be more difficult. Higher spending was the second thing on that diagram. So you've got income going down, spending going up. I'm going to focus a little bit less on this one because it's a bit harder in the pension space to think how you influence this, but it is a really important piece of context. So in a study of 5,000 people with mental health problems, 93% said they spent more in periods of poor mental health. We have done lots of in-depth research unpicking what's happening here. For some people, it is an increase in costs. So if you struggle to use public transport because of anxiety or phobias and are stuck using taxis, that's much more expensive. If you're at home all day because you're off work, your heating bills are going to be higher. If you can't manage to get to the supermarket or you're struggling with cooking healthy food, relying on takeaways is more expensive. But actually, for a very large number of these people, this was psychologically driven spending. It was people who are spending more in periods of depression to make themselves feel better when they're on a really long waiting list to get access to mental health services. It is people who are in a manic episode of bipolar, who have lost the ability to control the impulse to spend, and so can get through very large amounts of money very quickly. This is just important to understand because your ability to make contributions and to save in the future is going to be significantly reduced when both of these things are happening. And finally, poor financial management. This is a really complex area, but is one that's really important to understand as a provider of financial services. So we all kind of are familiar with the fact that mental health problems affect the way we feel. You often see kind of adverts and things about mental health that will have emojis and smiley faces and those kinds of things. But it's just as true that mental health problems affect the way that our minds work, and we don't talk about that very often. So mental health problems can affect our memory, particularly our short-term memory. And if it's hard to recall information that you've been given on the telephone, or if it's hard to recall the details of a letter or a policy, it's much harder to stay on top of financial management. It can affect our attention. So working through a complex process like choosing a pensions product or making a financial decision can be harder. They affect our psychomotor functioning. So this is particularly about the speed of our responses, our ability to retrieve memories, and our ability to make those kinds of decisions and recall the information that we need can be impaired. Crucially, when thinking about pensions, motivation is likely to be decreased. And this can easily come with a kind of value judgment, and it never should. Motivation is not something that people choose. Motivation is something that you can have and you cannot have, and your motivation will vary at different times in your life depending on your mental health. But if you're struggling to get out of bed, if you're struggling to wash, if you're struggling to see a sense of the future for yourself, then why would you think about your pension? So that's a massive barrier for a lot of people. And finally, communication. So half of people with mental health problems have significant difficulty making telephone calls. If the only way to carry out a particular function of a financial product is to make a telephone call, it's essentially inaccessible to a lot of people with mental health problems. Similarly, we know that large numbers of people stop opening the post in periods of poor mental health. Which is actually why one of the things that works quite well about pensions is an annual statement in the post is a nice, small amount of contact. It's manageable. It doesn't matter if you don't open it for a month. It's something that you can pick up again later. But it is really important to understand where there are time-critical decisions to be made, that actually there are a group of people who will be struggling to receive information and to communicate with you. So it's not the most cheerful picture, unfortunately, but it's important to say this will vary person to person, and this will vary throughout people's lives. And there will be periods of time when somebody who, even with a very severe mental health problem, is very able to engage and take part in these decisions, and there'll be periods when they'll be less able to. So one solution is about making sure that you have the flexibility to engage with people when they can engage with you, and to leave people when they can't, which is one reason why auto-enrollment is such an exciting solution. We're really keen to see across all kinds of financial services and products defaults that help people and protect people when they are struggling, but that allow people to make decisions and take back control when they're able to do that for themselves. And finally, on the accessibility point, at Money and Mental Health, we've recently launched a set of accessibility standards for mental health. We've been pretty familiar for quite a long time about if somebody picked up the phone to you and said, I have a visual impairment, I have a hearing loss, you might know how to adapt your services or what to offer them. But if somebody got in touch and said, I have obsessive compulsive disorder, or I have really severe depression, would you know how to adjust a service or what kinds of things you could offer them? Most places don't. So we have developed a set of accessibility standards that can be applied within a business so that you can get a really clear understanding of that. And finally, I wanted to end on this because I always try and make sure that we have some direct experience from real people involved in these things, because it can be easy to forget what it's really like. But this is a quote from someone in our research community explaining what it's like living with depression and trying to make financial decisions. And I think keeping that person in the back of your mind when designing a system or interacting with customers means we can get it much better. If we design things that work for this person, they will work much better for everybody. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Helen. Thank you so much to all of the speakers. I think that was a really fascinating set of discussions, and I've been sitting here thinking about whether there's a question that can tie them all together, and it's really hard because they're so diverse. But I think what I took from it, thinking about the sorts of kind of developments that I think the speakers are kind of pushing at in terms of the system, I think, you know, Helen, you were talking about the power of systematic defaults in protecting people who might be going through really vulnerable circumstances. I think, Yvonne, you were talking about how systems might need to be changed and adapted to take account of how women might be falling through the gaps. And I think, Iona, you were more in the kind of space of thinking about engagement and empowerment and individualization. And I guess that's quite an interesting kind of set of perspectives when you think about where we started with talking about automatic enrolment being a blunt instrument, but a really good one. So I guess just to start off the questions, and I'll just ask this one and then we'll open it to the floor, but have I characterised that right in terms of your attitude to kind of the balance between systematic change and kind of personalisation and engagement? And it'd be interesting to hear as well if there was one thing you could do, thinking about the future of automatic enrolment and pensions in particular, to improve things for the group of people that you're thinking about, what would that one thing be? Sorry to put you on the spot. Who'd like to start?
I'll start.
Yeah.
I thought what Helen said about having a system that works for people who feel capable and confident, but also one that works for people who need to take a step back for whatever reason, I think that can overlap a lot with young people or self-employed people, gig workers, who may be at this point in their life where they need to take a step back and they need to address other financial priorities. And I think that we're all hinting at the need for a system that will accommodate that. What I didn't mention in my presentation was I would love to see what would happen if we had a button that we could press and that we could just pause contributions. How many people would take it? Probably not that many, but it could be taken up by people who really need it the most. And then if in the future we move to a point where we need to up contributions, it's so much, I think, less likely that people will then balk at that higher rate because they know that the system is not inflexible. It's not going to force them to do something that's against their interests. So having that option there, I think it won't necessarily be used by everybody, but just having it there for people who need it is crucial.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree that in terms of one thing that I would add, a combination of sidecar savings and the ability to pause contributions would really help people who are balancing short-term financial difficulty with thinking about their long-term financial prospects. And for somebody who is struggling this month to work out how they're going to pay their council tax, I think it's fairly clear objectively that if you have a choice between making your pension contributions or paying your council tax, you should pay your council tax. You can end up in prison if you don't pay your council tax. You know, if you miss one council tax payment, you can be billed up front for the rest of the year. It is the logical decision to make. Yet what we don't want is people to stop their pension contributions so that they can pay their council tax. So if you had the ability to pause or the ability to tap into a small amount of savings in order to be able to do that, that would be really great. And I think you did characterize correctly that for us it's very much about how do you make sure that when people can't engage they are protected and that defaults work, but that people don't have the ability to engage taken away from them. And particularly actually thinking about, so I'm particularly concerned about those times when periods of poor mental health or impaired decision making for other reasons coincide with times when you have to make crucial decisions about financial products. So, for example, we hear from many people who enter early retirement on the grounds of ill health and often related to people's mental health. I'm concerned about what's happening there when people are making complex decisions about their pension when they're often not very well. So anything we can do to create a bit more space for people to be able to delay those decisions and make them at a time when they know they're more able to would be really beneficial.
Okay.
Agree with all that. I think, for me, a lot of it comes back to just a much sharper institutional focus, as I was saying earlier, because I just don't think we know enough about individuals' outcomes and circumstances, and I think the sort of female-male thing is a very, very good example of that. And to do that well, I think that needs changing, and I think it just needs to change in government policy more generally to really make sure that the world kind of works.
And I guess getting the balance right between waiting for that evidence base to appear, but also drawing on evidence we already have about how people behave and using that to design products and systems that we know will protect them while we're waiting to see how some of these things play out. But I think the pause idea is quite interesting because in a way, you know, if you opt out in automatic enrolment, you do get re-enrolled, right? So there is a process of re-enrolment that happens, but that's over a 3-year period. So that idea of kind of introducing a level of control through a pause is just a slightly different and kind of more direct framing of that.
Also, opting out can be a real hassle.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm
And it feels
self-employed.
much more final.
Yeah, and I've had to opt out of pension schemes where I've worked at an employer for one day. And I think to myself, I'm not quite sure what the prospects for that particular pension pot will be in another 40 years' time. I think I'm going to opt out of this one. But it was a huge hassle. And I think there is a space potentially for this suite of products where we have this more gradual easing back into pensions. Say you've taken time off work if you're a mum. It's not just this stark divide between that's it, you're not saving into any pension or you're in a workplace pension. How can we try and bridge that divide with more flexible products? So we're saving something. It's not the optimum amount, but we're doing something as opposed to nothing.
Okay.
It takes you back to that blunt instrument debate, doesn't it? I mean, it's a wonderful policy, and actually you can pause and restart pensions. It's not impossible. What we need to do is we need to bring people with us on this sort of journey from, you know, being defaulted and not making any decisions to getting more engaged and do what they can, and then they take account to where people are really struggling with that.
And also, I think thinking about unintended consequences, because if you start to introduce some more flexibility and choice, you sometimes have that counterbalance of, will the employer come in and encourage people to stay at a lower level of contribution or what, you know, so it's thinking about the complexity of how that changes the model, because you have to engage then.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Shall we open it up to questions from the floor?
Do you want to take my question?
Yes, thank you. So Guy Rigdon from my bank. I'm also on the Financial Capability Board for the Money and Pension Service. And I think there's representatives here, so they may want to comment. I think from the Money and Pension Service, What Works research, they found that, and clearly we had 4 programs that went through that, and we certainly could demonstrate evidence that financial education worked. So whether that's very early...
I didn't say that financial education didn't work, but I was talking about the kind of topics that you talk about at various stages and how you talk about them.
So, yeah, if I can go on to say, I think it seemed to come across to me, and I was asking for clarification on that, but certainly I think what they did come out with is you need to do relevant financial education at relevant ages. So I think it is pretty important you start early. Just making young people comfortable talking about money early, I think would be a profound change in virtually everything we are talking about, because then they would question the outcomes and the implications of choices that they make more. But what I certainly agree that I think the second thing is that it was found that not enough was being done at ages 16 and 17, so up to and coming to a crucial transition point. I agree with that. We have 2 programs that deal with that. And thirdly, we work with a lot of young, vulnerable adults, or young adults in vulnerable circumstances, and their much more detailed knowledge and choices is necessary, because you could be talking about survival. So I felt I had to make that point, because certainly to me it came across that financial education is not really that worth doing, and I think is absolutely part of the measures that you need to make sure that there's better financial outcomes and well-being to deal with a number of the issues that you're talking about here.
Yes, well, I completely agree, and I'm a massive supporter of my bank. I think my bank is one of the most effective financial education initiatives out there. I have seen some that in my opinion, are less effective, and I think the evidence doesn't necessarily show, although we are obviously in the early stages of personal finance. It's only been on the curriculum, you know, for quite a limited period now. So we don't have that widespread evidence yet. This is very preliminary. But I think you're right to make that distinction as well between talking about money generally at a young age and getting us as a society more comfortable about the topic, and then those more targeted interventions at 16 to 18 when young people's minds are on the next stage in their lives. But yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I suppose my blog is about financial education. I think it is just about, when it comes to pensions specifically, I feel that is a topic that you can only really have headspace for when you are about to enter the world of work, and you can process that as part of the wider financial issues that you'll have to consider.
So brilliant panel, really enjoyed it. I guess I wanted to pick up on something David Laibson was saying earlier about the system being effective because it combines nudges but also traditional incentives and harder mandates and things. And obviously a big part of the challenge you're all pointing to in different ways is time away from traditional work, which is the structure we use to get people saving into private pensions, penalises you when you come to retirement. So my question is, to what extent might there be scope to actually mirror some of what we've done in the state pension system and actually move towards some kind of financial credit into private pensions that matches some of the credit conditions in the state pension system, so that you can still be accumulating if you're out of work, at least for what someone somewhere deems a reasonable reason, whether that's something you've thought about or you think could work?
I was going to mention something quite similar to that, and I thought, that's way too out there. So I'm glad you did.
Yeah, I think finding creative ways in which people can continue to contribute when they're out of work is a really great thing to be exploring. I think there is that challenging question of what for a reasonable reason means and how you would ever interpret that. For people who are out of work sick, that's a bit simpler, because you can get a doctor's note, you can be clear that you are off work sick. But we very often hear about this vicious spiral in work where people, often for financial reasons, stay in work for longer than their health really means that they should. So people are, it's presenteeism, people are turning up at work when they're not very well. As a result, people's performance is declining. So if you're struggling with your mental health at work, it's really hard to be on top of your game. So your performance is getting worse. Then we get to a situation where someone's entering performance management and they have to make a decision, am I staying in work or am I going off sick? And if I know I can't afford to go off sick because I don't have any kind of income replacement, often people will stay in work and find that either it ends with somebody losing their job for a performance-related reason, or often people will quit, so leave in, on a particularly bad day when they find they can't cope with it anymore. And so there is a group of people who are out of work for health-related reasons, but who wouldn't be classed as off-work sick. And I think that's a really complex problem. There will also be people often with very little income to draw on to make contributions. So I think yeah, absolutely the right intention. I would love to hear any ideas about how you get around that particular problem.
I think in terms of carers who very often leave the workplace altogether, and they're of course entitled to certain benefits like carers allowance, but what I said earlier is that they don't receive any contribution for their retirement security other than for the state pension. And we have to ask ourselves, I think, as a society, whether that is an equitable state of affairs, and not just from a gender perspective. If you look at what value that actually creates for the economy, that there's somebody who needs care and who's being looked after, then there is, I think, a very strong argument, and that's exactly where we ended up in that working group, that actually people should be receiving a pensions credit based on, say, the national living wage to compensate them for the work they do, which is so socially incredibly useful, of caring for someone. So yes, that's obviously a much bigger question. Again, you know, welfare policy, exchequer question. But I think we mustn't duck these as a society.
And I personally, again, this is my view, I would be more in favour of that system as opposed to, I guess, the bigger debate about how we fund social care, which will come from the bigger pot. And inevitably, we will have to do more to fund social care. But at the same time, part of it is because there is that lack of reward for the role that caregivers play in society, which do tend to be women. I just wanted to ask, actually, Helen, what do you think about the role of insurance in when somebody does have to take that time off work? Do you think that insurance could be part of this landscape and pay out more flexibly and easily if people can't be in work, so they're not drawing on those savings and potentially opting out of their pension?
So insurance is definitely part of the puzzle. In our research, we found very few people with mental health problems who had access to any kind of income protection product, primarily because if you're looking at an individual policy, if you have a pre-existing condition, it's very difficult to get it in the first place. I'd like to see much wider availability of group income protection, because in group income protection, you don't have to notify about pre-existing conditions because the risk is spread across an organisation. So actually, for many people with long-term mental health problems, it is sad but true that actually the best option, if you know you're going to have frequent periods of workplace sickness absence, is to go to a very large employer that offers a really good workplace group income protection policy, because that is your most reliable way of sustaining your income. So I would really like to see more flexible ways of opening up access to group income protection for people who don't work for those kinds of employers. So looking at how you could pool different smaller employers or look at people who are self-employed. I think that is an effective solution, but there is also the big question of what is the role of the state to provide income replacement during that period of time. And I think we also need to be more ambitious about what kinds of sick pay and what kinds of benefits people should be able to get access to and how quickly, because that is really crucial. If it takes you 5 weeks to access any kind of benefits when your sick pay ends, that is a cliff edge that many people don't have any kind of income to cover.
Question over here.
Thank you. Hi, Yvonne.
Hi, Daniela.
So one of the things that struck me through all of your presentations is that, Yvonne, you're obviously talking about the gender gap, that women actually constitute, certainly in retirement, the majority. You were talking about mental health, that affects potentially half the population. We know that actually through demographic shifts, there are increasingly the numbers of young people actually now constitute more of the population than ever before. That although we frame this as sort of difficult to reach groups, you're actually talking about the norm if you sort of add up all the different groups of people that you're talking about. And I wondered if that speaks to a blind spot, perhaps in terms of pensions design and pensions policy, and if you sort of, one, agree with that, but also why you think that might have been, that we think of this as sort of other people that we have to fit in, but actually it sounds like when you talk about universal design that this seems that it actually is to benefit of probably the majority of people.
What a great question. Can I have a go? So I absolutely think there is a big blind spot in the sector. And I attribute that largely to history. Pension provision was largely, and I'm talking about defined contribution. Defined benefit is totally different again, of course. But defined contribution, pre-automatic enrollment, largely intermediated, so largely done through financial advisors. So if you're the long-term savings provider, the insurer that sits behind it, you don't necessarily have to worry all that much about the end consumer, because that was kind of what like the financial advisor was there to do. Secondly, I think there is a gender issue here, actually, because I think in many organizations, the top was largely male actuaries who think about the world in a particular, incredibly valuable way, but you can't necessarily have just one group of people with one particular skill set go and develop products. And I think a lot of the products that have been developed, with profits is a perfect example, wonderful conceptually, very, very difficult to get across. And that is kind of part of the blind spot, I would say. That's all changing, which is terrific, but I think that sort of historical basis on which the long-term savings industry was set up, I think there's still a bit of a relic of that that's with us today. And I would certainly identify those two factors as quite strong.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think mental health has been a blind spot across all of society for a very long time. And we have got much better at talking about mental health in some contexts. So within the health system, mental health services are chronically underfunded, have been for a very long time. Waiting lists are extremely long. You will get a much poorer resourced service within mental health service than you will in physical health services. But there has been increasing political attention over it over the last few years, and things are heading in the right direction, albeit very, very slowly. Mental health has been a blind spot in terms of the school curriculum. It's been a blind spot in terms of HR and line management, in terms of the conversations we have about the important things in our lives. But within financial services, it has been, I think, so much of a blind spot that we haven't even really noticed that it was missing. At Money and Mental Health, we've been around for 3 years, and a lot of what we do is have these conversations of saying, have you considered the needs of people with mental health problems, or how all of our mental health might affect how we're using this product or our access to it? There is definitely a shift happening, and we are definitely seeing, particularly amongst regulators, a real focus on how do we meet the needs of this group of people better. But there is such a long way to go. And your point about universal design is absolutely spot on. If we design things that work for people with mental health problems, we design things that work better for everybody, because who wouldn't like to have fewer phone calls to make? Who doesn't find that sitting on hold to a call center is incredibly frustrating? It might not be causing you a panic attack, but it sure isn't adding much to your evening. So yeah, adding that kind of universal design focus to financial services will completely change the game, I think.
Yeah, and in relation to young people, what you talk about is a product of a pensions industry that was largely geared towards defined benefit, where it really was about that far-off destination, whereas now we have this more immediate, urgent problem with engagement because we have a younger workforce. Millennials are going to be the biggest group in the workforce by next year. And there is a need for them to understand that their contributions might not be sufficient, that they may not be in a suitable default investment strategy, and so on. I think there are moves now towards having better representation within the pensions industry, better young representation, which hasn't really been on the agenda, but I'm part of a fantastic group called the Next Generation Pensions Group, and we're really pushing for more young trustees, more young representatives across the pensions world. And I think it's partly because there is a disconnect. I was at an event last week and I was speaking to somebody, and we were talking about all these issues, and I told him about the experience of someone I knew who wanted to put more into her workplace pension. Wow, fantastic, that's what we all want, yay. She couldn't do it. It was a total nightmare. She asked and asked and asked, and it wasn't possible. There's all sorts of reasons why. It was just a bureaucratic mess, basically. And this chap, who was a financial advisor, he was incredulous about it. He was like, no, that can't have happened. It's totally easy. It's totally straightforward to contribute more. And I was saying to him, it happened. It was almost like fake news for him. And I think until we have younger people sharing those experiences of, what it's like to be enrolled in a workplace pension, the issues that they encounter, what they need, and so on, then we're going to have that disconnect, which is not helpful.
I think I'm going to have to say stop, I'm sorry, with no warning, because it was such a good question that it's taken up the last 5 minutes. Thank you to all of our panellists. I think it's been a really fascinating discussion. I think it just shows in a way that we're in a really good place. We've done something fantastic. We've got a great base of saving. And now we can start thinking about some of these complexities and filling some of these gaps, but doing it in a way that does, that keeps people protected in different circumstances. And I think that's something that government is really alive to and is thinking about. And I think it's the right time to be having that conversation because there's no policy happening. So let's have it now. And by the time it starts up again, we'll know what we're going to do.